So, this episode, I've actually been sitting on this episode for a little while. This is the second half of Blade of Tyshalle, which is book 2 in Matthew Stover's Acts of Cain. So, second half of the book, if you listened to our discussion of the first half of the book, either over at Inking Out Loud or on Patreon, then you know that the first half of the book really did a number on me. And the second half of the book, I had no idea what to make of it. And you're going to get that sense, I think, through this episode. Ultimately, I didn't know, and I still don't know what to make of the book as a whole, now that I've read the second half of it. So lots of just abject confusion on my part, and you're going to get that in the episode. After we recorded it, I kind of hated it. I debated not putting it out at all. And so I asked Drew to do a redo, another episode. And we did. We actually recorded another episode to go along with this one because it gets into some of the more philosophical, political discussions that we didn't get to in this because I was just so shell-shocked during this recording. So if you'd like, you can go check that out. If you want to just laugh at how confused and blank I am through this whole episode, then that's great. I hope you enjoy it. But I wanted to let you know there is another episode on Blade of Tyshalle Part 2 that essentially covers this one chapter that we didn't really talk about in this episode, but that is pivotal to understanding Cain and probably Matthew Stover and all of that. So that is there at patreon.com/legendarium if you want to check that out. It's available to anybody who is a patron, so there's no minimum dollar donation or anything like that. You can give $1 an episode, and then you can have access to this and other premium content. So with that, enjoy this episode. Thanks to Drew for being patient with my idiocy, and thanks to you for watching or listening. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Legendarium podcast. I should say welcome back to those of you who went to the Inking Out Loud stream to hear the first episode on Blade of Tyshalle, which was a bit of a downer. So welcome back to part 2 of Blade of Tyshalle. This is the second book in the Acts of Cain by Matthew Stover. And I'm Craig. I should introduce myself. Hi, everybody. I'm Craig. I'm joined by Drew, of course. Hi, Drew.
Yep, how's it going?
That's a loaded
Better
question.
Than last time?
Let's save that for a moment. I'll just remind everybody to go to thelegendarium.com to check out past episodes, check out the calendar with future episodes, and links to Patreon and Discord. That's what I was forgetting. So as a reminder, we are flip-flopping across both feeds for this series. And so I'll need you, if you want to listen to all of the Acts of Cain series that we're doing, me and Drew together, you'll need to also subscribe to the Inking Out Loud podcast. And then you'll be able to get all of the episodes. The other way to do it is if you are a patron of either show, you'll get all episodes in both of those Patreon feeds. So there you go. A few options for you. Drew, Blade of Tyshalle, part 2. All right. I want to start with a comment that I read a while ago. This is a few weeks ago after we released our first Heroes Die discussion. So this is the last one that was on the Legendarium stream.
Right.
I saw the comment, I chuckled a little bit and then ignored it. But then you sent me a message earlier today and said, hey, did you see this on our Heroes Die episode? It's a YouTube comment. Now, to be fair, most people are not watching on YouTube. Most people listen on their phones, and that's as it should be, right? But some people do like to go watch the discussions on YouTube. So, hey, everybody. So this is where that one came from. And I'm not going to name the person. It doesn't matter that much, but I love this. I like your content. I shared this with my friend who loves this book. So we're off to a great start. Thank you. And I hope that that's sincere. And I have reason to doubt it because the next part of it goes, he thought, this is the friend, I shared this with my friend who loves this book. He thought you guys did a bad job and should be familiar with the work before talking about it. Rather than bring readers to it, he seems to think you'll turn people off the book. So that's right. My friend asks a lot of questions. My friend says a lot of things. My friend gets all the weird diseases, right? Um, so
Oh.
anyway, no, I am using this partly to poke fun at an excellent YouTube comment, but also partly to say, okay, so we did a bad job. We should be familiar with the work before talking about it. Drew, I'm about to talk about Blade of Tyshalle with you, and I'll be honest, I have no idea what the heck I just read. So there was a lot that happened in the second half of this book. I felt like the first half was really pretty straightforward, and I'm not going to do like a real in-depth recap for anybody, so you can go look up a plot summary or something. The first half of the book was pretty straightforward as far as what the stakes were and who the players were, and then in the second half, I felt like it all kind of like, pooh, it exploded. It was like a firework in all directions, and it was genuinely a little bit tough for me to hang on to on a first read through. Thoughts and feelings?
So, yeah, like you said, no like in-depth plot summary. If you want that, you can go check out our original episodes on Inking Out Loud. We did Blade of Tyshalle in 2 episodes, cut off at the same part we did here. So I think it's like episode, I don't know, 12 or 13. And that one kicks off with a plot summary. But like you said, it's not even necessarily about the plot. It's about like the themes and ideas that Stover's diving into here. The core of the book.
Hey, I was just talking about the plot. We'll
Oh,
get
you are
to
talking
all
about the plot.
James's. Yeah,
Okay.
no, I'm.
Well, so the plot then, we basically got like, I don't know, 3 main things going on. We have Wraith and Cain, which that explodes into several different things. We have HRVP and Ancana, and then we have Faith and Avery and Milekoth and Colberg. And
Right.
And so it all gets kind of muddy because Wraith ends up being this conduit. He touches the blade Cassal, which has Pallas Rill's entombed soul in it, and that kicks off this like metaphysical war for control of Wraith's body. But as like Pallas Rill is winning this, she causes everything to grow in Ancana, like a massive, insane hyper spring, and that also affects the progress of HRVP, and the whole city basically instantly goes insane. So we have like this crazy jungle growing through the city where every little plant and twig is blooming into giant trees, and throughout it all is this like red haze of diseased madness. And I love personally how fever dreamy this whole sequence goes. Yeah. Like when you get in the head of Damon, the monastic ambassador, and like he starts realizing that like he needs to drink blood, or he thinks he needs to drink blood to slake his rabies ravaged throat.
Right,
like,
and it's your blood. It's who it's Wraith that's closest to him, right? So it's your blood. You didn't tell me. Yeah.
But then, of course,
it's creepy.
He makes that thematically important, though, because what is the cure ultimately for HRVP? It's Cain's blood.
Right.
Because his blood has Shambaraya, Pallas Rill's antivirus in it. Right. And, yeah, it's so, like...
Oh, boy. And then there's Stover's the sacrament scene.
Layering everything over it. And then, you have this... this kind of tug of war going on between the blind god and Pallas Rill, and then Wraith eventually, where he's given this kind of like mark of Cain almost, or stigmata if you want to be less on the nose, where his hand
I don't know, that's pretty on the nose,
is leaking the oil of the blood god, and he is the single conduit connecting the blind god. Did I say the blood god? The blind god. Talking blood and blind, whatever. And that's like his doom. That's what Chris at the end of the book, Delan, says, this is your punishment. You have to hold the line for the rest of your life. Um, but but the really crazy thing, though, and I'm not even going to go into all the details about what it means, but I think probably the most confusing moment in the, like, plot-wise, the most confusing moment in the book is, let's see if I can find it here. Oh, yeah, okay. So it's when Hari finally confronts Milkoth on the road in Ancana, and he kills Milkoth.
Yeah.
And things get weird. It's at the end of 25. We face each other in the infinite now. Down the long street lined with people squinting against the noonday sun. We both know how this is supposed to play out. Our parts have been carved in legend stone for centuries. You know, and he goes through a bunch of, you know, historical examples, and it gets this, like, really larger than life sense of, like, we are archetypes in this moment. We're not individual people. We are representative of something. And it's all taking place in this one, like, infinite moment. And he cuts Milkoth in half, the same stroke that killed Palace Rail, that killed Shauna. And something happens that we'll get to later in the series. But the last line is, and power blasts back up through the blade, through my fists, my arms, my shoulders. It hits my heart, slams up my neck, and blows away the world. And then, you know, we get the usual chapter ending, Dark Angel, Crooked Knight, Myth segment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then it opens with chapter 26, and it's Chris's point of view. It's in first-person perspective, but it's not a soliloquy. It's not Cain talking through the thought emitter back to Earth the way he does throughout the rest of this book and earlier in the first book. And I kind of like that, because the way it opens at the start of 26, you kind of are like, is this Cain talking?
Right.
You know, and it takes a little while.
It gets to the whole twins or brothers who didn't know they were brothers or whatever the thing was, right?
Mm-hmm. And we get this extended epilogue where kind of we're given the state of the world now. Chris has been resurrected and created into this, like, immortal elf, like real elf, but like immortal deific puppet who, like, if he dies somehow, if he's killed, Home, Milkoth, Tenaldion, whatever this, like, new merged mega god you want to call it, can just make him a new body and stuff his mind and soul right back into it.
Right.
We get, you know, kind of the fates. Lots of people are given new paths in life. We get a new monastic ambassador in Wraith for Ancana. We get, like, Tapasi's kind of fate. We get the ennobling of Avery and Faith. And Cain just kind of rejects everything that's offered to him. And he says, you know what? Like,
I've got stuff to do.
Yeah, I'm going to be a free agent. And
then we find out in the epilogue why.
Yeah.
What he's
and then he goes and, like, nukes Mark Velo's house with magic on Earth.
Right. All right. So there's stuff to look forward to. Let's talk characters. Okay. I think this will be a way for us to get into what actually happens in this part of the book. We had met Avery Shanks before in the first part of our discussion, and obviously hated her. She's very hateable. And then at the end of the book, she's how would you put it? She's still pretty hateable, but redeemed in some way for the reader. She's given a purpose that matches her personality more closely than what she had before in her life. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that is fair.
So she is Chris Hansen, Delan, who's now he's the emperor in Ancana. He sentences her basically to take on a noble title and raise Faith, who is the actual noble now, And Avery Shanks is her what's that term? What's the term I'm looking for when you
Like
rule
a
in the stead?
regent, sort of.
Yeah, regent. There you go. So anyway, that's what she's up to, and I really enjoyed her chapters, and I want to get your take on them. But the reason I enjoyed her chapters was because at no point does he ever make her completely change her personality.
No.
There are things around the edges, where her love of faith that she kind of resists at first and then gives into. Her love of faith gives her a new goal to work toward, but the way that she works toward that goal still feels very much like the Avery Shanks that we got to know in the first half of the book, right?
Yes. What changes is her worldview is shattered. She herself as a person is still functionally, spiritually, emotionally the same, but her
The system she was a part of.
Yeah, her security in life was taken away, and so we get to see her react to essentially the same things that Cain had to react to. A threat to family,
to faith. Yeah.
A loss of status, a loss of volition, and she addresses it completely differently from Cain, but it makes a lot of sense. And it does make us, at least for me, and I think probably for a lot of readers, it imparts some sympathy where you can feel, you're like, wow, she was a stone cold bee in the first half of the book, where like she is just awful to Cain.
Yeah, she's awful.
But then she has to directly deal with a much greater evil. And then suddenly you're like, oh, well, like I can kind of root for this kind of person against the greater evil. And I think that's encapsulated in the idea of like how she's the one who ends up killing Colberg.
Right, which we should talk about.
By literally like ripping his throat out with her teeth.
And what she there's a throwaway moment where a line, when it came to Avery Shanks, she this and that and the other, and she discovered that she liked the taste of blood.
Yeah.
He goes on and tells the story. Oh my gosh. This okay. So that's Avery Shanks. Do you have more to say about her? Because I want to talk about Colberg.
No, let's talk about Colberg.
Who gets his throat ripped out. All right. So if I never read this book again and somebody asks me in 10 years about something in the book, that something is going to be Colberg. So it's memorable. Absolutely. He is memorable. And yet I don't understand what Stover is doing with Colberg here. Who is the blind god? What is happening to Colberg in real terms? I mean, this whole book is a freaking fever dream, right? But in practical terms, what is going on with that guy?
Yeah, so the blind god is the idea of just the collective will of humanity that can be either good or bad. And Colberg is empowered with the blind god's like agency, but it's channeled through his particular outlook on life, but just magnified to the scale of all of humanity. So he goes from being like a petty, vindictive, kind of disgusting human being to an absolutely revolting monster.
Right.
Who has the ability to do literally whatever he wants because he is now humanity. He is the face of 10 billion people. And so like, I think you were asking about this earlier in the book in the first half where he has that moment at his desk where, the screen flashes white and then everything changes and you're like, I don't get why he's acting like this. And it's spelled out a little more here in the second half where it's like he is the representative, he is the face of the blind god. He's not just Arturo Colberg anymore. It's often the man who used to be Colberg, or like the thing that we once called Colberg. So
and he is presented in whatever chapter that was in the middle of the book, when Tan Elkoth descends into Colberg's
11, yeah.
lair. Yeah, chapter 11, there you go. He is presented as, here is the new villain. This is your big bad. This is the guy you've got to watch out for. And then
Yes.
I kind of felt like that wasn't the case. He was being used it seemed like he was being used by everybody else. Well, like in the scene with Tanelkoth and Faith in the whatever experimentation room, where she's strapped down to a metal table and he's kind of, that's not the word I want to use. He is delving into her mind in a violent and unwelcome way. And Colberg is there, but it's like, is Colberg in charge? It seems like there are some other people in charge. I am unclear on what's going on. Basically, what I have to come down to is, yes, YouTube commenter, you're right. I don't know what's going on in this book. It does require a second read through and maybe a third before I finally figure out what's going on here. All right, so what's going on with Colberg?
So he is in charge. Tanelkoth thought he could manipulate Colberg because he thought Colberg was Colberg. But and that was the impact of that scene when he goes down into the lair. It's that Tanelkoth, you are Tanelkoth, not my Elkoth. You are no longer a god. You are now a man. And as a man, Colberg is the face of you.
I see. Okay.
And so he is utterly at his mercy. You have Soapy, you have the themes of, your face reflected in their face, and Soapy is kind of the hand of the blind god in this book. So they're layers of kind of visual motifs to build this idea of the blind god representing human beings. And it's only really on Overworld that we can get humans fighting against the blind god, because there are other gods, there are other powers.
On Overworld,
but that also opens the door for the ultimate twist at the end, that Myelkoth, when Tanelkoth returns to Overworld and becomes Myelkoth again, Ascendant, he is no longer represented by the blind god. He is Myelkoth again. And so when Cain kills him and it shuts off, he doesn't have a body to be controlled by the thought mitter anymore, Myelkoth's power and spirit and mind can be Myelkoth and merge with this new uber god on Overworld, so to speak. And to become...
Okay, so Myelkoth was Cain killed him, but he's not dead, much like Shauna, right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Shauna is part of Shambharaya.
Right.
Palace Rill is part of the River's Song, and Myelkoth now is... In the first book, his whole thing was, I am the god of humanity. Now he is, I am the god of Overworld. Because kind of the theme at the end here is that on Overworld, what makes it work is that it's not just humanity working on its own. It's the combination of humanity and the primals and the stonebenders and the pixies and the tree toppers and all that. So.
Okay. All right. So, I got to say, with the whole, merging with Shambharaya or being separated from your body and thus you're free to, et cetera, et cetera. I'm relieved because, as you know, I was devastated. Preview for the our what are we calling it? The final draft. We're stealing it today. I was devastated by the death of Palace Rill, and then it turns out that she's still around and is still conscious. She still has a will, which was a relief on the one hand, but on the other hand, now that this is happening with Myelkoth as well, it's making me think, I don't know, are we in danger of losing the stakes here? Is this becoming a comic book movie where there's that great Star Wars video from Red Letter Media, no one's ever really gone. I don't know. I'm less satisfied at the end of this book than I was at the end of Heroes Die, because for a lot of reasons. But for one thing, I'm like, well, is will things ever move forward, or is this just kind of one of those mythological, we're destined to fight 1,000 times over, I'm Rand and you're the Dark One,
I
over and over
don't
and
think
over?
that's the point Stover's going for.
Okay.
I like. I think the point he's getting at here is still sort of the same theme he was hitting at in Heroes Die, the idea of there can be many kinds of death.
Yeah.
Where, like, yes, Palace Rill, like, the mind of Palace Rill still exists, but it is directly merged now with this impersonal, inhuman god of the river, and it's very clear by the end of it that, like, this is over. Like, there's no more relationship with Hari. There's no marriage anymore. There was a very touching scene, that when he opens the conduit to her on the road, and, oh, I understand now. If only I could have been the man you needed me to be, and they have that goodbye moment. But it feels very final in a way that, so it could feel like a death, a thematic death of the marriage. And even the idea of, like, Chris being brought back to life as this, like, immortal emperor, he ruminates over it. How much of this is really me? What's the point of this if I don't have full control over my life anymore? And you're like, it is, if you have an artificially created god body, like,
yeah, and that was another one where there's a great sequence of watching Chris Hansen or Delan go through the final kind of battle sequence, and he had 11 minutes. Yeah. He had 11 minutes to live.
So good.
And then you go through another several pages of, of what's going on around him and his thoughts. And at the end of that, he had 8 minutes to live. And you're like, gee, Christmas, this is taking a while. And then, he gets, like, freaking nuked. Luckily not.
He takes the energy of a nuke and, like, channels it through himself to save the city.
And then that doesn't kill him. Like, it does, but it doesn't. This is just another one of those, like, okay, so what are the stakes here? Like, does death matter in this book?
I think it does, because everybody who dies, even if they exist onward, they're irrevocably changed.
Should we get into Duncan at that point? Sorry, go on with what you're going to say.
We will talk about all of these things in later books.
I know. I have my Duncan prediction. It's chambered and ready to go.
But this is kind of the final chapter here, is a major transition point for the series. And really the second half of this book overall, but this is the key, like, the final moments of chapter 25 and then chapter 26 to the end, is where what Stover is doing plot-wise is going to dramatically shift. Like you said, it was pretty straightforward through Heroes Die and through the first half of Blade of Tyshalle. Like, Hari's got X objective, has to do Y and Z to achieve it, and he has to fight off, like, antagonists A, B, and C, whatever. Here it becomes much more nebulous. We don't really know what his stakes are. When he leaves, he's got his, like, revenge moment with Mark Velo, but other than that, we're like, what are you going to be up to? We don't have a clear-cut conflict going forward. And this is one of the reasons that I maintain that each book in this series, or each act in the series, can be read as a standalone. Actually, I had a comment on our Discord the other day where a guy said that he picked up Blade of Tyshalle first. He had no idea it was part of a series, read it, loved it, and he was like, I totally think it can be a standalone.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
I
don't think I could do that with this book.
Yeah.
that would be a lot to ask.
Yeah, but narratively, he doesn't make this a serialized thing. where there's open-ended conflicts at the end of each book to pull you along into the next one. You could just stop here, the way you could just stop after heroes die.
Interesting, because the end of this book with when he kills Mark Belo and says, "Hey, the game has changed. The portal goes both ways.
You're on notice.
Gird your loins because I'm coming after you." That felt very much like, stay tuned for next week. When our intrepid hero. So it's interesting that I do not say that with any like bitterness or anything. I think that's totally fine. You should give a little tease, a little reason for people to pick up the next book. That's totally fine. But it also works, like you say, as a just kind of a cool, maybe not open-ended, but it's an ending with plenty of possibility. But it's still an ending.
That's fascinating. Because I didn't read that at all that way. I always saw it as like Cain wrapping up his business on Earth and then saying, "Look, we're closing the door. If you try to reopen it and mess with us, we can come after you. Leave us alone."
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. That's true. He did say that. That's just not the message I took from it.
Yeah.
The message I took from it is somebody's going through the door. So
man. Oh, and now I'm really excited to get your thoughts on Cain Blackknife when we go into that, because
we'll get there.
We will.
I should have mentioned kind of at the top of this episode, but it's probably good I don't. I already pissed off one YouTube viewer. I don't need to piss off everybody who loves this book. But when you and I had our discussion on part 1, and we got to the end of chapter 11, I think, or whatever, I didn't pick up the book for like 4 to 6 weeks, something like that. Like I would go to grab it. I'd hold it in my hands. I would turn to chapter 12 and I'd read like a few words. And then I would go, I can't. It took a long time. And it basically, what it took was you saying, "Hey, when are we going to record? When are we going to record? Let's record. Hey, when are we going to record? You ready to record?" I'm like, "All right, fine. I'll read the freaking book."
Over the course of like 4 months.
I might have DNF'd this book under other circumstances. I was pretty devastated. It was just so bleak, so dark. Anyway,
honestly, it doesn't surprise me. I know there are other people out there who've had that experience.
Yeah.
I did try to warn you that it was going to get dark.
But go on.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say, even for me, where overall, I like Blade of Tyshalle. It's my least favorite of the 4. I think in some ways you can make an argument that it's the quote-unquote best of the series, and I know there are a lot of Stover fans out there who hold that opinion. In fact, if you were to like do a general poll, I bet, be like, what's the best book of the series? I bet Blade of Tyshalle would end up number 1 in that.
Interesting.
But like for me, even the first time I read it, I finished chapter 11 and I had to like put the book down for a little while. It wasn't 4 to 6 weeks, but it was like, a couple of days, which that's unusual for me. And, I needed to let my soul heal a little bit after reading about Shauna and Colberg, especially Colberg. Oof.
Yeah. You would tell me these things, and I think it's fair to say that you are a somewhat more sensitive soul than I am. I tend to be able to to just kind of take, sex and violence and language and all this stuff just kind of like washes over me, and I don't really care all that much. That this is not the case for you, right? So you would tell me, I had to let my soul heal, and I'm like, okay, so something bad happens. Oh, fine, whatever. No, it was rough. Turns out I do have a soul, and it is capable of being bruised. So anyway, okay. Sorry, that was a super tangent. I want to get back to our characters here, our character list. Let's go to the other storyline, which is the Cain one. And this actually kind of ties in with what I was saying earlier about the first half of the book being more straightforward, where I found myself having the most fun is the wrong word at almost any point in this book. I say almost because there's the scene when when Cain and Tanelkoth escape whatever the museum.
Oh yeah.
Like that's a pretty fun scene.
I was gonna say when Cain like first gets into the pit and he like outmaneuvers Orbeck and then
that's exactly what I was going to bring up. Is okay, so Cain has watched his wife get murdered in front of his eyes, which is absolutely terrible, and then he's in a kind of catatonic state. He gets taken to the capital and thrown in the pit, and we're familiar with the pit because we went through the pit briefly in book 1. Now he's stuck in the pit, and it's kind of it's a bit like chapter 0 in that it felt like this separate story, like a little novella within the book, where you have Cain at his lowest, has to figure out a way out and creates a ragtag army with all these prisoners, and like you say, outmaneuvers the ogre. We'll just call him whatever it is, Ogreloi or something.
Ogreloi, yeah.
Yeah,
get used to that word.
Right. Yeah, I assume Cain Black Knife will feature a lot of that. So anyway, but that kind of interaction where he's using his street smarts and his incredible skills with violence to turn this army into his own, I was like, okay, now we're cooking with gas. This is the Cain I'm used to, which is, I'm sure that hurts the brains of some of the more rabid Stover fans listening, but it was just a relief on a first read through to get back to the familiar version of Cain. And I suspect that on a second or third read, that stuff would still be fun, but I would be better equipped to pay attention to the other passages with more philosophy and tons and tons of dialogue. I mean, there was plenty of philosophy in the prison, but there's a lot of that.
Oh yeah,
but I don't know.
I was going to say, I thought that was what you were going to talk about. Was like
we should
having trouble with the philosophy in the prison sequence because. So this was actually when Rob and I, well, I'll be honest, it was mostly me, talked to Matt. One of the things we chatted over was difficulties in writing and difficulties in crafting a story. And he said Cain in the dungeon and in the pit was the toughest part of this book for him to write because in the original outline for it, you know, Cain is taken to the dungeon and he's thrown in a cell. Right. And he's just stuck there. And he was like, I need Cain to have this character nadir in here where he is alone in the dark with his thoughts. And he has to have this revelation about what the Black Flow means and what he can do on Overworld versus on Earth. I need to have this happen. But I need Cain to have agency while that happens. And I can't figure out how to do that while getting him to rock bottom. And he eventually cracked the code by having Cain get Majesty down and in and convince him, hey, throw me in the pit so I can do something there. Right, and then he can engage in active conversations with Tapasi and with Chris and with Orbeck. And then he hits his true rock bottom when they move him to the shaft. He is on what he thinks is on the ascension. He's got the pit under control. He's organized it. He's making a breakout plan that's going to ruin everything for Assumption Day. And then it's all yanked away again. And they throw him in the pit. And that's when he has his revelation.
So that scene is interesting because the scene in the shaft, because this is the worst part of the worst part of the worst prison in the Empire, right? The descriptions are really quite disgusting. What was I going to say? Gosh, you
The
know what? I'll think of
philosophy?
it. Yeah, well, there's a personal philosophy there that I wanted to get into, but I need to organize my thoughts.
Yeah.
Tell me about the black flow and the revelation that he comes to with the black flow or the black shell.
So this is tough to put into words. Um,
Oh, and I just
but
remembered.
basically the idea of black flow and the reason it can like defeat the stone, the limestone of the pit in a way that other flow can't, is that it's not really magic in the same sense. It is
Mm,
more pure force of will. It is, but not even will, it's the pure force of action and decisiveness. It is, uh, it goes to the root of Cainism as a philosophy, my will or I won't. And so Cain has this moment of apotheosis where he realizes, you know what, I have this power available to me, and on Overworld, this power has a metaphysical manifestation. It's not just an idea of, wow, I'm really good at making my mind up and putting my entire spirit into doing one thing, achieving one goal. Here, I can use mystical powers to make that happen.
mm.
And that kind of defeats the anti-magic protections in the prison and allows him to say, you know what, I'm going to sit here and bend my entire will, all of the training I've had, all of the experiences I've had, on one goal. I'm going to move my
To
feet.
move his feet. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That makes some kind of sense, I suppose.
Yeah.
No, the thing I was thinking of is that scene when he gets himself thrown in the shaft. I found that an interesting moment because essentially he's as you say, he feels like he's on the ascent. He's created this little army of prisoners, and they're gonna bust out. Come hell or high water, we're out of here. And then things don't go quite as well, right? They could fight it out, but a lot of people are going to die. He's probably going to die. He's kind of just thinking, it'll be one last hoorah, and then I'm out of here. Um, and then he decides not to because Delan begs him not to, and he he surrenders, says, "Take me, throw me in the shaft, whatever. I guess I'll just go to my lowest point," and he volunteers himself for that. And I thought that was an interesting moment because it did feel the whole scene in the prison felt very pointed, like it's about a person about like me living my life, in suburban Utah or whatever. Like, how do you make your decisions? How do you move forward? How do you make choices? And there's this idea that he plants in my head that in order to truly ascend, you have to not just hit rock bottom, but dive. And I'm not sure how I feel about this. I'm not
Yeah.
sure if I agree with it, if I like the kind of personal philosophy behind it. But that's what it felt like. It was like, hey, you have to reach rock bottom, and if nobody's going to push you there, then you push yourself.
No, I actually think you're right. I don't know if he's quite advocating you have to hit rock bottom, but I think the philosophy he's pushing is you have to destroy your own illusions in order to achieve this kind of
Mm,
transcendent will.
okay.
And where I disagree with the philosophy, it's the idea that any meaning is automatically an illusion. That nothing has meaning unless you give it meaning. That
Mm,
there is no inherent truth or reason or meaning with capital letters in the
right.
world. It's just you got to accept that it's just what I choose. And I personally cannot subscribe to that philosophy, but I do think it's an engaging thing to read about, and it certainly does make me stop and think and consider. It's not necessarily that everything in my life has to be Cainist, but there are moments in my life where I'm like, man, maybe this is a good opportunity that I can apply this sort of thinking where, if it's a career choice or, something that I'm being wishy-washy about or looking for some deeper meaning in something that is purely mundane. And you can stop yourself and think, hey, how should I approach this differently? How should I approach this more effectively? So it gives good food for thought, even if ultimately I think the foundation of this Cainist philosophy is, not for me.
Right. It's hyper individualistic, right?
Mm-hmm.
As you say, the only thing that gives meaning is what you decide has meaning. And
Well,
yeah,
so we talk about, in the first book, and especially in chapter 0, the Patreon episode, we talked about the idea of like how the political and economic philosophy plays out in these, and how there's kind of critique of end stage capitalism and critique of end stage communism. I feel like Cainist philosophy is like quote unquote end stage libertarianism.
That's where I was going to go with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Feels very much like, I, there was, who was it once described Cabin in the Woods as either a hateful love letter to the horror genre or a loving hate letter. And that's kind of how I feel about these two books and libertarianism. I can't decide if he loves it or hates it because of how he comes after it. But I guess there's no need for us to decide quite yet. But speaking of libertarians, we should talk about Duncan, Hari's father, Duncan Michelson, who gets cyborged. At least that's what we hear. He gets taken off, and whatever that means, they remove part of his brain or insert something into his brain and basically turn him into just a meat conduit, a la the Matrix or something like that. Yeah. So he gets cyborged, basically like for his computing power that his brain can provide, something along those lines.
Okay, just quick interruption. If you dig into the actual science, the efficiency of energy usage in the brain and heat is way, way better than we can currently do with technology. Like, if you were to build an actual, like, android that could think like a human being, that the energy consumption would be absolutely untenable. So it kind of makes sense that they would want to use human brain power in this way. Sorry, go on.
Sick, disgusting sense, but sure. Okay. Anyway, so we don't really see Duncan after the first half of the book. We just kind of hear about him, but we hear echoes of Duncan throughout, in Hari's head, or just kind of the quotes that he uses, the people he references and all that. But Duncan finally gets cyborged, and this is where my prediction comes in. He's not going to stay cyborged. I don't know that they've mentioned that it's a reversible process, but it kind of sounds like it's supposed to be, irreversible. But with Hari moving his legs, with him kind of force of willing, magicking himself back into a state of movement, I don't think he's going to let Duncan just kind of wallow. I think he's going to go after Duncan and try to de-cyborg him. There's my prediction.
Ooh, okay.
Because he needs, he's going to need his wisdom, such as it is.
Okay. Nice. I like it. Always like predictions.
But what do you want to talk about with Duncan in this half of the book?
I don't have much specifically to say about him, but to say, what a tragic bit of writing in this book. That lingering image of Hari standing outside of the Abbey, watching them load him into the truck and fly him away. And the last thing he, quote unquote, says, he walks his fingers.
It's an inch toward daylight, right?
Inch toward daylight.
Yeah. I have quite enjoyed him as a character, even though we barely ever see him. But his chapters, his conversations are so loaded, so meaningful that
Yes.
I guess I'm going back to my whole Shauna thing, like where are the stakes, right? And here I am begging for Duncan to be brought back from being cyborg. No stakes, please get rid of all stakes. So anyway, I've really enjoyed him quite a bit, and as you say, quite tragic. All right, who else do we need to talk about?
We got to talk about Chris.
Wraith. Oh, about
and
Chris.
Wraith. Oh my
Chris
gosh.
Hansen.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do Chris and let's do Wraith.
So to start off with Chris, I have a quote. One of my favorite lines in the entire book. In my whole life, there are only 3 people I've ever really trusted, he said. One of them was my father. The other 2 are you. Love that.
This is Cain talking to Chris.
Yeah. Because Chris is 2 people. Chris is Chris Hansen, and Chris is Delan, the Methondion. He's the half elf on Overworld, and both characters have this like tragic but ultimately uplifting. Because with Chris, really his whole arc is contained in chapter 0, and Delan is the rest of the book.
Right.
And they both have a tragic but ultimately uplifting story.
And we could maybe also talk about relationships with their fathers. And you know what, we could do that. We could bring Cain into it, but we could also just talk about both halves of Chris and Delan having certain relationships with their fathers and what gets accepted and what gets rejected.
Yeah. It is interesting that how much we see of primal culture and how xenophobic they are, and yet Delan was accepted into the royal family as an adopted half primal child.
And what did he do? He kind of like tricked his way into it or something?
Torinel, one of the sons of...
Yeah, the older brother.
Yeah, he was lost. He was a prodigal son. And that
return
was... Yes. That the return was Delan's doing. And for that, he went in and demanded like a gift.
A boon, yeah.
Yeah. And was surprised by the boon he was given. But
all right.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, what with Chris, or Delan, what do you call him in your head? Do you think of him as Chris Hansen, or do you think of him as Delan? I think that might be kind of revealing.
I think of him as Delan.
Okay.
It's the first time I read the book, I thought of him as Chris the whole time. It wasn't until I revisited Blade of Tyshalle and really started digging into how the character arcs were shaped and sort of where the book ended, and realized how Chapter 0 sits apart and why it's called Chapter 0 and not Chapter 1 or Prologue. That was when I said, no, there's a demarcation here. This is Chris. This is Delan. And Chris is just here in Chapter 0.
Okay.
I think there are moments in Chapter 26 where Chris peeks out a little bit when he's talking to Cain.
In the very end, yeah.
Over glasses of 100-year-old brandy that Cain doesn't like because it's not Scotch. Yeah, he's like, nobody on this whole world has figured out how to make Scotch yet.
What do we make of his storyline then? As you say, it's Delan's storyline after Chapter 0. What is the point of him as a character? Now, what I mean by that is when I think of Duncan, when I think of Majesty, when I think of Tanelkoth, Avery Shanks, I can kind of see what Stover's trying to accomplish or what he's trying to say through these characters. What do you make of that for Delan?
I think Delan's purpose is one specific thing. It is a reaction and a counterpoint to Heroes Die. Heroes live here. Delan is the hero of this story. And he lives. He gets more or less his happy ending. We are given hope. We are given promise for the world. And it is because of his heroism.
Fair enough. On to Wraith. I just don't have anything to add to that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And this is why, like I said in the first part episode, we hit these absolutely abyssal lows in this book.
Yeah.
But the contrast to the highs make the highs all the brighter to me. And Chris is the brightest of those. It's no coincidence that his whole symbolic thing is fire and light. Whereas Cain is shadow and darkness and black flow.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, what was it? Two brothers?
Yeah, twin brothers apart. Born of different mothers. One is dark, one is light.
Right, yeah. Exactly. There you go. Okay. And then there's Wraith, who...
No.
Okay. Wait, why don't I just Wraith? Turn you... No, of course I don't like Wraith. Wraith's a piece of garbage. Okay.
Do you like Wraith as a character?
I don't know how to answer that. Honestly, Drew, we got to the end of chapter 11, and I had opinion after opinion after opinion. And I gotta level with you. At the end of this book, I'm so in need of a reread that I've got nothing. I have nothing for you. I don't know what to make of any of this. I've told the story ad nauseum, so I apologize for repeating it. But I get to the last page of the Silmarillion at the age of 17, and close the book. It says the end, and I go, what was that? And turn to page 1 and reread it. I am not prepared to just turn to page 1 of Blade of Tyshalle and do that again right now, but I will have to do it again to figure out what I think of this book, what I think of the characters. I just don't have it in me right now. Which is extremely unsatisfying for a podcast, but that's why you're here. Okay. So,
okay.
So what the heck is going on with Wraith? I don't like Wraith. I don't, he feels very, okay, I'll do the best I can. He feels very, primitive in his emotions and reasoning. And this fits really well with the idea of the blind god. He's the final kind of bulwark or even resting place of the final god, right? In the end. And that makes sense. If the blind god is the distillation of humanity, then Wraith is the character that I felt like much more than Colberg. Wraith is the character who embodies human nature. So you hit me on the head, I will hit you on the head. You killed my family, I'm going to kill your family. I will do what I have to do to get my revenge. It's very primitive, right?
He is a thoroughly ironic character. Everything about him is built on this idea of his tremendous powers of mind. But yet he is terrible at critical thinking. He does not consider the consequences of his actions. He acts upon emotion. He just goes. And in that way, he is very different from Cain. But in another way, he is very similar to Cain because both of them are very good at bending their entire will upon achieving something.
They're both men of action.
Yeah. But I think it's such a cool, complicated character where you're like, this dude is like telepathic, telekinetic, all the tele things better than anybody else has ever seen, but yet he's a terrible thinker.
Right. Which is the one thing he's supposed to be able to do.
And we see him at the end of the book totally broken down because all his illusions have been stripped away. And he realizes, this is all my fault because I failed to think about things.
Interesting. Okay.
I don't like Wraith as a human being. I do love him as a character.
Yeah. Okay.
There
That's
was
fair enough.
so there was a I think it was an April Fool's joke or something that Stover posted years ago. But it was a fake book, a fake title
Okay.
that
Yeah.
like got out called Wraith of the Bodecan, and I remember like seeing it first out of context, where I was like, wait, he's writing a Wraith book? Oh yeah, like this is going to be incredible. And then I looked into it more and saw it was a joke. But that's how I feel about Wraith.
Yeah.
I'm not going to equate him to Egwene in the Wheel of Time, but I feel about them similarly. I wouldn't want to sit down and have a drink with them. I wouldn't want them to be my next door neighbor or in my friend group. But
you're glad
as
they're there.
characters, they're written brilliantly.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Drew, I have never been wrung so dry by a book. I've already said a few things to this effect, but I just feel emptied out. So we're gonna need to maybe talk a few more things, get some excitement going, so that I have a little momentum to get me into Cain Black Knife. Okay, so let's do some final thoughts, even if they take 10 minutes. Let's do some final thoughts. What do you got?
Yeah. Okay. So I have a few highlights that I thought were worth bringing up here. This is going back to that scene of Cain confronting Malkoth on the God's Way, and this surreal, weird emotion and description. He's brought his own kind of spring, drawing life from the city's fallow earth. The ruins sprout cardinal red, maroon, and gold, scarlet-streaked saplings that uncoil toward his solar presence. Social police and household knights and good old uncommon regular infantry, digging themselves out of their burrows of rubble, helping each other up, even the wounded, even the dying, so that all can rise in respect, then kneel in reverence at the arrival of God. And it's weird. Weird is the only word for it. Not in the debased and degraded sense of the mere peculiar. Weird in the old sense, the Scottish sense, the old English root. Weird with a Y. Because somehow I have always been here. I have always sat in the rubble of the financial block, facing down the length of God's Way over the carnage and ruin of Old Town, perched on a blast-folded curve of a salt car hull with Cassal's cold steel across my lap. The rumpled and torn titanium wreckage permanently ticks and pings as it eternally cools under my ass. A few hundred yards to my left, there has always been a smoldering gap where the courthouse once stood, and he goes on and on and on. I will always be here because there is no future. Everything that is about to happen never will. Now is all there is.
Yeah.
You want to know what's going on there?
No. Do I? I don't know.
Read the last two books.
Oh, okay. All right. So what chapter is that in?
That's in, I believe it's in 25.
Okay, just so people can reference that. It's in chapter 25 somewhere.
Yeah, it's right at the beginning of chapter 25.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. All right. So that's what we have to look forward to, apparently. I'm looking forward to some Ogreloy, some sweet Black Knife action.
Cain is a Black Knife now.
Right.
Orbeck adopted him.
There's blood oaths and whatnot. Speaking of blood oaths, oh boy, you know what? I mentioned it and then we skipped right over it. So Cain's Jesus, apparently.
The sacramental cure.
Which honestly, it felt really heavy-handed for me. There's there's so much subtlety going on that moments like that come up, and I'm like, oh, come on. pass the cup around, a few drops will do, that, etc., etc. I didn't love it, but I'm open to loving it on a future read.
So this is an interesting thing for me. I've read this book 3 times now.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought of it in that way until you mentioned it. And
really?
I think that's because...
You're a terrible Catholic, Drew.
Well, there's another series with a similar scene that is more direct in what it does. And that has just kind of taken up that chunk of my brain space of like communion in fantasy.
Right. What series is that?
The Book of the New Sun.
Oh, well, of course. Why did I even bring it up?
But I think the biggest thing is that, so as a Catholic, and honestly, like more toward the traditional end of Catholic, when I receive communion, I only take the host. I don't drink the cup. I never have. That's like a thing, a carryover from the like pre-Vatican II Mass. Typically, right. The congregation would only receive the body of Christ. At least, like in the Latin Mass, the Tridentine Mass tradition that I come from. But so like for this, where there wasn't a physical or like a food representation, a body representation, it was only the blood, I didn't make that automatic connection.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there's my Mormon upbringing serving me there in that one. Okay. Look, here's what I'm thinking, Drew. We go on, we do the rest of this series. Okay. The next episode will be here on the Legendarium. We'll do the first half of Cain Black Knife. Then we'll go over to IOL, Inking Out Loud, like and subscribe, etc., etc. Yeah. We'll do that for the final 2 books. Now, Drew, I don't know where I'm going to be in a year, what's going to be going on my schedule, any of that stuff. But I want to reread Blade of Tyshalle and redo this episode. Maybe we end up doing like 10 episodes or something because I feel
there's
like
enough.
There is enough. And I went through, I had my highlighter, I've got the pencil, I'm making notes. And then I realized as we were sitting down to do this episode, I was like, look, I could get lost in a ton of rabbit holes. But I don't think I have it in me today to get lost in those, to dive in. So I want to redo this episode in about a year. And really dig into some of the philosophy, because it was lighting my fire, as you know, like the last 3 or 4 episodes that we've done. I really wanted to get into the economics, the philosophy, the politics of what's going on in these stories, and this book really did just kind of like, I got sucked dry on this one, more vampirically, not the fun way. So I need time is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, for sure.
We'll come back and do this one again. Sound good?
Oh, I would love to do like a 1 year later retrospective on Blade of Tyshalle.
And we'll get Matthew Stover to join, and I can be like, all right, let me tell you why the sacrament part didn't work for me. All right. Great idea. Okay. Drew, I said at the beginning,
final draft action.
We're stealing the final draft. This is a tradition over on Inking Out Loud, but we'll do it here because I was saving this one specifically for something in this series. When is it going to work? When is it going to be most appropriate? Today it is most appropriate. Okay. I've been drinking a double bock lager from Wasatch Brewery. And it is fittingly named Devastator. And I I've said it 3 times now. I'll say it again. I've never been quite as devastated by a book. I just like mentally and emotionally injured as I have been by this one. So happy endings or no, this was a rough one for me to read.
Fair enough. I think that's an eminently respectable state to exit Blade of Tyshalle.
Okay, good.
I am drinking something pretty fun over here. This is a whiskey barrel-aged stout, a double barrel, Weller Antique Bourbon Barrels and Leopold Brothers Rocky Mountain Blackberry Whiskey Barrels.
Okay, sure.
From Cerebral Brewing Company in Denver, Colorado, 15.1%.
Jiminy Christmas. You're still functional.
Yeah, it's a big boy. I mean, I haven't had nearly all of it. I still have a full glass. But like you said, very appropriate for the book. This one is called Here Be Monsters.
Either of them
there sure are an awful lot of monsters in this book.
Yeah.
Before we end the whole Blade of Tyshalle conversation, I want to leave us on a quote. Hari likes to quote Nietzsche, and when you gaze into the abyss, remember that the abyss gazes also into you. My only reply, this is from Chris, or Delan, my only reply is the mantra of Conrad's Kurtz. Now, if you have read Heart of Darkness, you may be familiar. If you're not, Kurtz's mantra is the horror.
Yeah. Maybe that's what it was. Maybe I wasn't prepared to stare into the abyss of my own soul. Thanks for making me read this book, Drew.
You are so welcome. It's going to be a lot more fun on the next one.
All right. Well, I'll be the judge of that. And so will everybody else who sat through me kind of and my lugubrious nature on this episode. So, yes, we will return in better form, or I will return in better form for the next book, and we'll see how it goes. So, again, that'll be here on the Legendarium. Like and subscribe based on, my other work. And we will see you all next time. Thanks, Drew.
Yeah, thanks, Greg.